all the leading SS officers and were hired by the Nazis, by the CIA. Right. This is very well known. It was part of, a number of them were hired under Operation Paperclip, where they were hired to work with NASA and other, scientific projects in the U.S. An important component was what's called the Odessa networks, which was used to channel or basically help a lot of these guys escape. And the primary places where they were taken were South America, which is very well known. Yeah. The other one is Egypt, where they were hired to train and assist in control of Muslim Brotherhood. And the other one is Italy. In Italy, they created what's called the Gladio networks. Yes. The stay-behind lines, and who eventually helped in development or creation of the Red Brigade. So just terrorism, terrorism is all the same, right? It's a modern production that basically dates back to Bakunin. It has nothing to do with Islam. It's an atheistic Luciferian approach to political subversion. And so Italy is a branch. The other one is Egypt. And the key trainer was a man named Otto Skorzeny, who was Hitler's bodyguard. And the other one was Reinhard Gehlen, who was, of course, basically was the leader of this entire, former Nazi network, former SS network, also responsible for espionage in the States. And what was revealed, which is very interesting, was revealed by Miles Copeland in the game. I think it's a book called The Game Player. Miles Copeland was in charge of his post was in Egypt, and he was working with Gamal Nasser, who was the president of Egypt. And what happened is that the Muslim, when Gamal Nasser turned against the U.S., they tried to use the Muslim Brotherhood to assassinate him. And the attempt failed. So Gamal Nasser had them all rounded up, and a number of them were executed. Most importantly, Said Qutb was considered one of the great ideologues, not only of the Muslim Brotherhood, but of Islam in the 20th century.
Sorry to cut you off, but Qutb wasn't I think this was one of the main characters that Adam Curtis looked into in his Power of Nightmares video series. I don't know if you got a chance to see that, but we're talking about the same one here?
Yes. Okay. Highly recommend that documentary. Doesn't cover everything,
no, of
but
course
it gives
not.
you a good background on a number of issues.
Yes, okay.
And so in these, quote unquote interrogations, which I guess some of them would have been pretty brutal, what they revealed, and this is what Miles Copeland reveals, a CIA agent at the time, he says that what the interrogations discovered was that the Muslim Brotherhood was a tool of that could be used at the whim of the American, French, German, Russian, and British intelligence services.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is that the CIA then, because of the persecution that they're undergoing now in Egypt, the CIA assists a number of them by helping them leave Egypt, but establishes them in Saudi Arabia. And there they're given posts as religious instructors. I can't remember where I learned this from, either from John Loftus, or the other interesting book is the one by Robert Bayer, which is Sleeping with the Enemy.
Mm-hmm, okay.
And that also has a few interesting revelations. So the CIA sets them up in Saudi Arabia, appoints them as religious teachers. One of the most important ones is Muhammad Qutb, who's the brother of Said Qutb.
Mm-hmm.
And Muhammad Qutb, then this is how bin Laden befriends Muhammad Qutb, and this is how he basically gets recruited to the Muslim Brotherhood.
Mm.
And this is at the point basically where we could go back now and explain the role of Saudi Arabia.
Okay, and the Wahhabis, because this is the tribe that was put into place then of to head Saudi Arabia, I guess, right?
Exactly. So, or the sect that was used But what happened is that, this is another aspect of history that Westerners are largely completely unaware of, which is the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
And, when we hear about the Middle Ages, we usually hear about what happens in Europe, and maybe the Renaissance as referred to as an important period or some kind of a cultural revival. But really the Middle Ages were dominated by the Ottoman Empire, which is the great empire at the time. And so when the British started to expand in power and started to colonize certain parts of the world, they employed what's called the strategy of divide and conquer, right? It's very well known.
Yes.
They're a tiny, tiny little island that eventually managed to control 3/4 of the world's surface, but they did so largely through deception. So they had to find a way to undermine the Ottoman Empire. So they had to pit Muslim against Muslim. And so the way they did that, now there's a fascinating story called The Memoirs of Mr. Hemfer. They're very easy to find online. It's a really an astounding story. And this is a guy who claims to have been sent by the British to find a way to undermine the Ottoman Empire. And he does his studies, he travels, and eventually he picks up on this one guy who he finds is corruptible enough that he's going to be able to work with him. And this is a guy named Muhammad Abdul Wahab. And so eventually they find, they kind of tempt him with various ways of committing, what are considered rather grave sins in Islam to determine for sure that this guy is corruptible, that he's a hypocrite. So they eventually recruit him into working for them. Mm-hmm. And so he basically, they take him back to Saudi Arabia, and it's from there. And at that point, they align him with a man named Ibn Saud. And they decide at that point that Ibn Saud will be the political leader, and Wahab will be the source of the doctrine that this movement will enforce. But really, the source of it is the British. So, how do you convince one Muslim to fight another? It's not allowed in Islam. There's no way. Islam is supposed to establish a brotherhood so that there is no, there's no killing others, there's no fighting other Muslims. The only way you can do it is by pronouncing another Muslim a non-Muslim, and then supposedly it depends on some, this is what Wahab argued, that then jihad becomes mandatory against those apostates. Mm-hmm. And what he used a very, very, very weak argument. And this was at a time when the British were already starting to encroach on portions of the peninsula. And instead of, turning Muslim attention to this threat, he turns attention to the issue of praying to saints. And at this time, Muslims were in the habit. Am I going too deeply?
Well, we're getting a little bit off track, but continue.
It's a little bit off track, but it's the only way to make sense of it. I won't go too far.
No, it's okay. We got to go through some of the background here. It's fine, David.
Yeah. So, and I'm looking at the time, and it seems like we have enough time. So some Muslims would say, oh, such and such a saint, pray on my behalf to God. Mm-hmm. So this is important to point out how weak this excuse was that the Wahhab and the British used to turn these people into fanatics, okay, and to disunite the Ottoman Empire. And so he said that this asking, intercession through a saint is an act of idolatry. It means that you have forfeited your faith. It means that you have apostatized, that you are an unbeliever because you have treated that person as a god, so that you have apostatized. Mm. So basically, he claimed that because this practice was common, that all the generations of Islam between himself and only the earliest generations of Islam had fallen out of Islam, and that they basically had not been Muslim. So he called on his followers to reject this entire Islamic tradition and to fight them. That he essentially declared jihad on the Muslim world. So they began by fighting in Arabia, and they seized a number of important places. They destroyed shrines, they destroyed all kinds of relics, and they massacred people, they enslaved women and children, all on the basis of this claim that people were that asking intercession from saints was this catastrophic sin. But obviously they were in service of the British. What happens then, though, is that the Ottoman Empire decides to step in, and they eventually squash the movement. But it survives in a very, very small group in a portion of Saudi Arabia, where they managed to retain their Wahhabi traditions. Okay. And so, interestingly, is that when the British finally defeat the Ottoman Empire, and a primary reason for that was to free Israel from Ottoman control. There was two agents that were very important in this. One was Lawrence of Arabia, who was working with Faisal, and the other one was Philby. I think I just was working with Ibn Saud. So the British promised Faisal that if he assisted them against the Ottoman Empire, first of all, at this point, the Ottoman Empire had already been overthrown by the Young Turks, right? By who were secret domini. Okay. And Afghani again was assisting the Young Turks in their revolution. So anyway, they convinced Faisal, who was the Sharif of Mecca, so essentially a leader in Saudi Arabia, that if he helps the British fight the Turks, that the British will make him king of the Arabs. But what the British do in secret, without telling Faisal, is they signed the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which decides to divide up the Middle East between the British and the French. Oh, okay. And the French get Lebanon, the British get Palestine and Iraq, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So Faisal, assisted by Lawrence of Arabia, it's a famous movie, you can watch the whole thing. They seize Damascus, and he goes right ahead and declares himself king of the Arabs. And then the British are like, actually, they basically reveal to him that they have a secret plan for him, and he ends up finally only receiving Jordan. And this is where the family is descended from. And then go forth ahead, and because the British government had already written a letter to Rothschild called the Balfour Agreement, yes, promising Israel to Rothschild, yes, and to the Zionist movement. So what happens is that then So Faisal is supposed to be king of Saudi Arabia as well as all the Arab lands, but instead they assist Ibn Saud in seizing control of Saudi Arabia. And Ibn Saud, who happens to be the descendant of the first Ibn Saud, who had originally aligned with Wahhab to try to spread this Wahhabi cult. A year later is the year where Ibn Saud signs deals to grant drilling rights to Rockefeller and his he was a SoCal and drilling rights in Saudi Arabia, and of course oil is discovered immediately after, right, and the rest is history. Right, so it's a very, very close relationship, and it goes all the way back to that point.